the working class rising up. This is the ruling class punching down.
My day, bigger your day.
First rule of gladiator school, bro. Don't punch down.
Charging into a goblin. Hail Trump!
The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within.
Control your own body.
We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
We can fight the entire grinding system. Nobody can. But together, everybody can.
I did nothing wrong.
Hello and welcome to Did Nothing Wrong Live, the show that cuts through the noise and helps you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff, and with me is Karl Folk. In today's episode, we talk about the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case and why the Trump administration is now saying that their hands are tied and they can't do anything about it. Spoiler, they're lying.
Yes.
We also talk about German intelligence services declaring the AfD, or the Alternative for Deutschland party, to be an extremist group, and the unprecedented statement from Secretary of State / National Security Advisor / Administrator of the United States Agency for International Development / Archivist of the United States, Little Marco Rubio, that the real extremists here are actually the German government, who are just not going along with what the population wants, because of course they came in second in the most recent elections, and it's not like the Nazis ever didn't do equally well in their elections, but I digress.
Yeah.
Finally, we'll talk about longtime friend of the pod, Darren Beatty, making an enemies list in his new capacity with the State Department. Thanks again for your support. Keep listening to learn more, and remember, we need you to smash those like and subscribe buttons. Well, folks, the sad saga of Kilmar Abrego Garcia continues. He's still in El Salvador at the notorious CCOT prison facility, and the administration is saying, sorry, can't get him back. Our hands are tied. We got no way to do this. And that raises a really good question of how did we apparently make one phone call to the Romanian government and get a guy named Andrew Tate and his brother, who have been very credibly accused of sex trafficking, back into this country. But for some reason, we cannot do that in El Salvador. That is what they are telling you. And by the way, that's not piss on your head. It's actually raining, really. We mean it.
Literally, though. And I mean, that's just it. The unfortunate truth is, outside of Russia and possibly China, the U.S. can get someone back.
Right.
It's just not an issue that generally you hear about, because we get people back. And it's not always the case, but more often than not it is. And so, this is obviously just a bullshit argument by people who are making a choice not to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's real, that is a true kind of mark of the power of Trump and the Republicans right now, insofar as they're just saying no. And they're doing it in a way that it leads to more obfuscation and more opacity.
Absolutely.
And so that's really, we're seeing that all over the place with Trump and the second round of the administration. And so, I don't think this is kind of out of left field, but we're getting into a territory where, people in a functioning judicial environment, people start going to jail.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's what needs to start happening.
Yes.
And this is really frustrating because it's become pretty apparent that Kilmar Abrego Garcia may not be a nice person. He's got some stuff in his past that ain't great. But that doesn't have anything to do with the current situation. Right. And Senator Van Hollen made that point when he was down there visiting his constituents, saying, I'm not defending the man, I'm defending his rights.
Yes.
And this is apparently what they're going to use now. Every time they want to violate somebody's constitutional rights, they're just going to go through that person's life with a fine-tooth comb, find anything slightly untoward, and then announce that that's why this person's being persecuted. That's why this person doesn't deserve to be treated in accordance with their constitutional rights. Absolutely. And that is a really scary road to start down. Yeah. Because now you're seeing people with speeding tickets ended up in ICE custody. You're seeing children that are American citizens that are being treated for cancer being rounded up. Yep. And that's okay because their parents were undocumented. And it makes a lot more sense when you realize that these people just straight up want to do away with birthright citizenship. They've said that.
Yes.
But there's a way to do that if that's what you're trying to do. It's called repealing the 14th Amendment, not just ignoring it. And let's talk for 1 second about why the 14th Amendment exists.
Yes.
The 14th Amendment was to clarify that people who happen to be of African descent are actually citizens of this country, came along during slavery. And part of the way that they were able to justify slavery was to argue that these people weren't citizens and therefore didn't have rights. So that's what you want to go back to. You can think what you want about this, but that's what you're advocating for when you say we want to end birthright citizenship. Why did we have birthright citizenship in the first place? Because we wanted to make it clear it wasn't okay to enslave other human beings.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, that's just it, right? Like, this goes to something we've talked about across a number of the episodes this spring, which is just like, this is the social construction of whiteness, right? And also the true face of what white power looks like in practice, right? Like, this is exactly what some of the most extreme voices in the white power movement have been pushing for decades.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of a realignment to a previous, mode for America, and a deeply authoritarian party doing it.
Yeah.
And so when you have something like the 14th Amendment, which does get in the way of a number of the, of the goals of this movement, they're either going to have to remove it fully through the mechanism that you described, right?
Yeah, like, repeal the amendment, get a 3/4 majority of the states to sign off on it. It's a complicated process. I don't blame you for not wanting to deal with it.
Exactly. Right.
There's a right way and a wrong way.
Yeah. Or you do it in this way, which is the way that in a traditional functioning judicial and democratic state, everyone goes to jail for contempt.
Yes.
And, I think we're going to see more showdowns, right? At different places between the courts and Trump. And we're starting to see more of it already. But we're also probably going to see a push by both Trump and, kind of his influencers, for lack of a better word, for the movement, really starting to push either just full on breaking, walking away from the judicial system, or liquidating parts of it. And they've brought up liquidating parts of the federal judiciary, a couple times now as things have gotten moving. But I think we'll probably start to see a real push. And it kind of goes part and parcel with Trump and the administration now threatening Tony Evers and other Democratic governors with ICE and being arrested in the same way that they arrested the judge. This is all a key part of the breaking and then remaking of the judicial system and law enforcement, right? And it's retasking them to do exactly what the 14th Amendment and other things have been put in place to stop.
Right.
And so, it's kind of a return to historic norms, but also a deeply authoritarian place.
Not the good historic norms either. I mean, these are the historic norms that we've literally fought a civil war to get away from.
Yep.
These are the historic norms that we've had to try and just dig out over the years. And we finally managed to make some progress towards the idea of we're not going to treat this group of people like subhuman cattle anymore. Yeah. And now they want to go back and say, no, we didn't mean any of that. And when you want to talk about what exactly the phrase white nationalist means in the year 2025, well, folks, this is it.
Yeah.
They want a white nation.
Right. And I think that that's the toughest part for me as someone who's actually been somewhat against using the term white nationalist. These are just white supremacists and kind of bog standard fascists and Aryan nation folks, and a whole bunch of other groups, Christian identity, Christian, different Christian far right. But like realistically, they're all fascists.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
That was always one of my gripes. But the reality is this is what they've been saying they wanted for a decade plus publicly.
Yep.
Multiple decades privately. And they, are now at a point where they're able to remake certain things, fundamentally break others. And we have to get very comfortable with the fact that this is how this is going to operate for a little bit, and really get to the point where we start acting to do what we can as the population to stop it, because they are
Right.
to continue this march as fast and as hard as they can.
Well, and the nice thing about where we're at right now is it seems like we finally hit a tipping point where Trump's approval rating keeps dropping. And one of the things that's dragging him down the worst is this immigration policy. The
Yes.
idea that we're going to just start deporting people and deporting them wholesale. And the numbers are really starting to bear out the idea that he is not on the side of the majority of anybody on this. And I think that's a huge driver for what's getting people out in the streets right now to protest, because we're seeing more and more people being upset and realizing, hey, this could be you. This could be you next. This could be your neighbors. This could be, it's hitting close enough to home for a lot of people for them to actually get off their ass and get out there, which is great. If that's what it takes to get you out there, that's great, because at this point you need to be out there and you need to consider staying out there for a while. We need to start considering, in my opinion anyway, some occupy tactics as far as getting out there and not leaving in some cases. And I think that's going to get easier to pull off. The closer we get to summer, the weather gets better, more people are going to end up losing their jobs over all of this. And at some point, we're going to end up with a critical mass of people who might be inclined to sit in the streets and wait it out.
One of the things that really, I think, is, apparent is people want action. And that's both good and bad. But one of the things that really has come out of this is, for a lot of people starting to realize that these mass movements, the ones that, are much more kind of, let's say, normie based and kind of just, a broad section of society, those give people permission to do other things later.
Right.
And the more actions they take part of, the more likely they are to be part of some kind of direct action or other protest later, because they become comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is my hope as well, is people really do take what happened yesterday with May Day, with what's happened the previous 2 or 3 weeks with large-scale protests, that people become more comfortable, because this is both what we have to be doing, but also this is how real change actually happens. It's not through institutional orders and the government suddenly making a huge change. It's by millions of people being in the streets and doing it all
consistently.
The time. And the diversity of tactics we've talked about, need to include Occupy style tactics. They need to include more direct actions that people may be less comfortable with now, but will become more so.
Yeah.
And, that goes the same with mutual aid and helping the communities that we are part of and build going forward with real, material help. In some cases right now, we're starting to see that more, where people are starting to understand, okay, we're going to take this money that we would normally donate to whatever large group and really putting it towards smaller groups. And someone who's done that expertly right now, and we're starting to see a glimmer of something very new, is what's happening with one of the new candidates in Chicago, who's a well-known counter-extremism, reporter with Katabu.
Oh, right. Yes.
What she's doing right now, I mean, truly, what came out tonight just before we recorded, is just another step in a line of really doing stuff in a way that is totally different, but also really gives people steps to change their community, not just through elective politics, but through direct action and mutual aid. And what she's doing is so they're announcing a high school public service grant program. And it uses the resources that she's gotten from the community donating to her. And basically it's developing a platform, volunteers, and a project system to help the communities where this money's going. And that's the kind of thing that we need to really get on board with going forward with these mass movements, is not fundraising for something like the DNC or for, the DNCC or these other,
Right.
but really fundraising for the people who need it, the communities who know them best and can get the money to where it goes. And the more we do that, the more chance we have to build resilience
Right.
into the pushback that's going to be more and more necessary going forward. There are a lot of resources out there that have been put out previously and new stuff coming out all the time on how to do this in different ways. I think we've both independently read and talked about, but never really on the show in a big way, like Let This Radicalize You by Kelly Hayes
Right.
and so it's just, there are things like that. Shane Burley's work. There's some really great people out there right now talking about how we can turn this into something that truly restructures the country in a way that fundamentally works for us, and not
Yes.
for the people who right now have control on both sides at the highest levels, which is the wealthy and those who have a motive to push us towards an even more extreme white wealth moment.
Yes. And a lot of the folks that are out there right now that are doing this have a whole lot of good reasons, a lot of them financial, to do it.
Yes.
But we're finally at a point where we're looking at, according to very recent CNN poll here, 52% of all Americans agree that this has gone too far.
Yeah.
That's up from 45% in February, who, at that point, 39% thought, oh, it's been about right. Now
Yep.
that's down to 33%. And even the number of people who think this hasn't gone far enough has dropped from 16% to 14% from February to April.
Yeah.
And, his approval rating, that's the best approval rating he's got. And it's not great.
No.
Everything else, the economy, we've got people freaking out about the lack of container ships in the ports.
Yeah.
We've got video game manufacturers saying, hey, guess what? Your Xbox is going to cost more. Games are going to be $80 this holiday season. I'll bet the Gamergate crowd never thought they were going to see Trump take Xbox.
Well, and that's just it, right? Like, some of these things, they happen in stages, and we're starting to see some of the stages unfold with the tariff stuff. And with shipping specifically, we have a massive, these ripples are coming in whether it stops today or not, because even if Trump were to reverse course as we're recording this, things aren't going to start moving for 6 months.
Yeah,
and
it's going to take a while.
And the longer this goes on, the longer it takes to reboot, and probably never will in the same way.
Right.
And, I think that for a lot of people, they're going to get a crash course in loss and loss tolerance. And the one thing that, Americans don't fuck with generally is losing their ability to buy cheap, shitty goods.
Yeah.
And when you start to get in the way of that, things are going to get, incredibly bizarre here.
Right.
And we're in such profoundly different and uncharted waters for this country in the modern sense that, even understanding the systemic risks and the social kindling that's here for, everything from straight up secessionist violence to white power violence from the state, there's just no good way to know what this really looks like beyond that we're just going to have continuing ripples of disruption,
right,
ambiguity, and real distrust, right? Like, I think that the thing that I can say for sure, as someone who studied this for a long time and understands how kind of the social ecology of these spaces works, this is going to be a place where conspiracy theory, people getting really strangely outside of the norms of real world explanation, is going to get huge. And the social repercussions of this are just massive. I truly like this is going to affect every way of life we have.
Right. Right. And we are pretty far down the rabbit hole already with
Yeah.
a lot of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it shouldn't really surprise any of us who are paying attention that it's just getting worse.
No.
But at some point, this is not tenable. This is absolutely untenable. And
No, absolutely. I mean, we're quickly. I mean, I'm actually shocked how much Americans are willing to take, and some of that is the lag between the thing happening and the actual effect of it. But some of it too is just people are willing to take a little bit of pain. But
Yeah.
this is untenable, and realistically, just looking at the infrastructure that's been taken out within government that was there to subsidize certain people's lives.
right.
When you couple that with the disruption from tariffs and from some of this other stuff, plus these systemic safeties that have been gutted now,
It's a problem. It's a real problem.
and it's going to be immediate, life-changing stuff for millions of Americans in waves, where it's
Oh,
different
yes.
groups, different people, just getting rolled over endlessly.
Mm-hmm. It's absolutely just, who knows where this ends up? Who knows how this ends up coming out?
Yeah. Well, and there are some historic analogs, but, barring the American people actually rising up and stopping this physically, we're going to be doing this in different shades for a long time.
Yes, we are.
And I think it's tough because both you and I, both on this show and off, really have tried to shy away from some of the tougher and more extreme examples of how these things end. But the reality is, a lot of the safeties that have been built in to modern society have been welded shut.
Yeah.
And the social pressure cooker is at 125%. And so, I really do worry about this summer, and I really worry about kind of how fast we walk into this, because we just don't have the system set up to protect people if the country does start to slide into some sort of social violence.
Right. And, that old quote about the riot is the language of the unheard. Yes. Well, again, we are not endorsing political violence. We have gone out of our fucking way not to endorse political violence, because that's a bad road. I still maintain that. I still believe that. Yeah. But at some point, you take everything else away from people, that's what you're going to get.
Well, yeah. And I mean, the kindling's there for people to act really obscenely. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of, in my work and when we've talked on this show, I think one of the things I try and stress is Trump is a symptom of that anger.
Oh, yeah.
Not just the driver of it. The things that got Trump elected in 2016, the resentment, the feeling that, economics had passed them by, some of the real things that were there, are still present. And people, if they don't feel like Trump's going to protect them, and they've already stepped outside the box, people are going to do really obscene things if they continue to have things taken away with no real material change for the better.
Right. So, kind of shifting gears a little bit, we're talking about being way down the rabbit hole, and we saw an example of that today with the Secretary of State, among other things, the guy who may really be in charge of the entire government based on his entire portfolio. They've got that guy in charge of any number of things, pushing back on a decision that was made by German intelligence to consider the extremist Alternative for Germany Party, the AfD, an actual extremist group. Now, this is a group whose leadership have been found in group chats making Anne Frank pizza jokes. This is a group whose leadership has made excuses for the SS, saying we don't really believe anybody who was in a group that, took an oath of absolute loyalty to Hitler. Well, maybe they're not all bad people. We've seen any number of other European populist political parties absolutely refuse to work with these guys. Yeah. I mean, how right-wing do you have to be to get some of the right-wing, like Le Pen's party and people like that in France, not to want to work with you because they think you're just too fucking edgy? They've designated these guys an extremist group, and then Now we've got Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and I want to quote this because it's amazing. Germany just gave its spy agency new powers to surveil the opposition. That's not democracy. It's tyranny in disguise. What's truly extremist is not the popular AfD, which took second in the recent election, but rather the establishment's deadly open border immigration policies that the AfD opposes. Germany should reverse course. It's like an American Secretary of State saying something to that effect. Man, we are down the fucking rabbit hole now.
Well, I mean, literally, you out of anyone would know as well as I do. Like, can you tell me the difference between that and an argument in, let's say, an Identity Europa video from 5 years ago? Yeah.
No, that's what he's saying.
Yeah, and that's from Rubio, right? And so, like, I think people need to be very clear. Like, AfD, I have had experience dealing with AfD members in different online capacities, whether that's infiltrating their networks or with them just in social media. They're fucking Nazis.
They are.
Like, there's no other way to put it. They're Nazis, and they are very proud of that. And there's no real debate within their group.
No,
they are.
What they say when they think there's cameras around and when they think there's microphones around may be a different story.
Yeah.
But you look at their internal communications, you look at their jokes, you look at their edgy memes, and it's like, no, these guys are using Pepe the Frog in their campaign literature.
Well,
they know.
Yeah, they know exactly what they are. And if you look at some of the reporting from even 5 years ago or before, they celebrate what they are. They celebrate the fact that they're Nazis. They celebrate that it's kind of, subversive in Germany. We as a Nazi. Like, it's not, like, this is not a very well-maintained, plausibly deniable thing. And for Marco Rubio, this is just kind of illuminating the way that their rhetoric and their propaganda works, right? Like, we're seeing how the sausage get made a bit. And I think that's actually been one of the things that I've been watching the most, is looking how the transnational far right is signaling to each other and how much the U.S. is leading that, but also just kind of boosting certain signals and in some places creating their own.
Right.
This is the broader picture of that network now.
And they're helping.
Yeah.
Rubio is definitely helping to launder this narrative. And it was good to see the German government pushing back on this. German government, their foreign office responded. Can you believe all this happens on Twitter? This is amazing.
Yeah. Full stop. That is a middle finger and also a look.
Cut and print.
Yeah, literally just a look. We've done this before. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
Message, right?
We know where this leads. We know what you're going to get. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, massive kudos to Germany on that one, because truly, like, for them to come out and say it is actually really powerful. And I think, the most infuriating thing for me is this is stuff that needed to happen a decade ago. This is not known about everyone from the AfD to Le Pen, and about the Republicans, and about Modi, and about Bolsonaro, and about all of these people. It's been a known commodity for almost 20 years. And so it's good, but it's also, this is, people who are scared shitless. And the Republicans here, I think, are also scared shitless, ironically, because they know how untenable and weak they actually are. And if they don't have key allies, if they don't have key allies like Germany or Britain or France or Canada, or we can keep going through the list.
Oh, we can.
They're truly fucked. And so seeing what we saw in Canada this week, where Carney won and did so in a way that was fucking humiliating for the Canadian fascist, which is the best kind of way, it just says how deeply unpopular this is and how much Trump actually hurts them.
Right. Because a year ago, Pierre Poilievre had this thing in the bag.
Yeah.
This was a foregone conclusion that the Conservatives were going to win huge in Canada. And what happened?
3 months ago, it was pulled out to the point where he was going to win by massive margins.
And Trump opened his mouth. Trump had to go and open his mouth and had to go and start putting tariffs on Canada. I mean, we have no better ally. We have no better friend. We never have.
Well, and the threats to sovereignty, like that's the one that still seems to have pulled the highest, is just in the Canadian election, is this threat that Trump posed their sovereignty.
Yeah.
We keep running into this, where the reality is most people in the countries that these franchise fascist operations are trying to take over in are deeply against it. And the U.S. is as well, right? We got hit by a wave of propaganda that's still, truly mind-numbing to think about. But, that's going to change here too. And when you start to see this thing like we're seeing with Rubio and the AFD, even people who are kind of like sidelong to this are starting to notice how many times the fucking Nazis get defended.
Yeah.
And that's
hard not to.
Yeah. I mean, well, and at some point, if you're for the Republicans, their counter narrative actually doesn't work against this because you're just seeing it. So, like,
nope.
When your whole thing is, well, yeah, we want them to win. If people find out who these people are, why do you want them to win? Becomes a real question that has how.
Well, what are you after that you think this is a good idea?
Exactly.
What are your values?
Yep.
I mean, which values do you share with these guys?
Exactly.
Do you hate immigration that much that you're prepared to go to the extreme of being a neo-Nazi about it? Because they are.
Yeah, well, because they are those people. Right. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's just it. I mean, and I think that the more times that people get asked to ask that question of these leaders and the movement, the more likely it is people are going to come away from it saying the correct thing, which is, Jesus fucking Christ, these people are fucking Nazis.
Oh, yeah.
And that's,
their
messaging, one of the things that people don't talk about with the historic, like with the Nazis, is their branding was so good that now it's forever there. And with Trump and the Republicans, they're running the same issue, right? Like their ideology is so incredibly dark and so incredibly perverse and anti-human that it becomes the stickiness of it becomes impossible to get off you. And so, with Rubio doing this is just another example, both of them thinking they have impunity to act.
Oh yeah.
Which is far scarier in some ways. But also
kind of to your point, you realize that like most Americans would agree, and it's been proven over and over, when you give them certain ideas, they think they're great. And you explain that those ideas are kind of part and parcel of a loose philosophy known as socialism. All of a sudden, then they push back. Yep. They love the ideas. They hate the branding. And part of the reason they hate the branding is because the Republicans have done such a great job of equating socialism with the worst monsters of the 20th century.
Well,
right?
That's a bipartisan project, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not just the Republicans. That's just been the U.S. government line for 80 years.
Right. And the flip side of that is that once you start explaining to people that these ideas are Nazi ideas that the other guys are coming up with, they recoil. Yeah. They absolutely recoil. Yeah. Like you said, they've done such a great job of establishing their branding that you're never, ever going to be able to get away from that.
No, and that's one of the most powerful tools we actually have as an opposition to them, ironically, is really lashing them to their own propaganda and to their own PR and to their own brand. And the more you do that, you can see that it shorts them out because they need to be able to. One of the things with fascists is they have to be able to hop between positions really easily to maintain the illusion that they have some kind of power, but also that they have a coherent ideology, because it's not.
No.
And so the minute you start pinning them down in that way, they either have to stick with it and double, triple, quadruple down, which happens a lot more than I am comfortable with, but that's what happens, or they don't and they back off.
Right.
I think in the case of the federal government, Rubio, this stuff, they're going to do the double down every time because it works for them. But, I think we're running into the real world here for them in a certain way. And, they're going to enforce it by will here,
Right.
of course. But the rest of the world seems to have at least enough grasp to say, look, this is an untenable situation. You can't have groups that are anti-democratic be in power.
No.
Just a recipe to get back to where things have been historically.
Yeah. And we're at a point now where they're having to go, farther and farther to essentially crack down on this kind of pushback.
Yeah.
And we've finally seen something out in public that a lot of us suspected in private was going on with Trump State Department appointee, guy named Darren Beattie. He used to be a professor at Duke until they found out that he had spoken at an event called the H.L. Mencken Club in 2016. And as Evan McLaren, who was formerly with the National Policy Institute with Richard Spencer, who's been on this pod, explained, the H.L. Mencken Club is a group of white nationalists.
Yeah.
They've had people like Richard Spencer speak at that group. They've had people like Peter Brimlow from VDARE speak at that group. And when they tried to give old Darren Beattie a job writing speeches in the first Trump administration, this came out that he had spoken at this thing. And he tried to tough it out. Ended up, they can't quite swallow this. He gets fired, starts a news site called Revolver that, is about as biased as you'd expect out of this guy.
Yep.
And he bides his time. Then come the next Trump administration, he gets in because they don't give a fuck anymore.
Nope.
And now he's in charge of apparently the enemies list at State Department. They're looking at staff, trying to find staff emails going back to see if any of the people that work there have talked about certain people on his list. Alex Jones, Glenn Greenwald, Jack Posobiec, Charlie Kirk. If you've said anything bad about these guys and you work at the State Department, Darren Beattie's got you on a list now.
Well, and I mean, it looks to be, I think the more chilling part is that it's also looking at journalists, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
this is going to be the Twitter files from the federal government. And I think, this is probably the most authoritarian thing we've seen, just in an unvarnished, like, fuck you, this is how this is now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
In certain ways. But yeah, I mean, we both know people who are on this list, right?
Yeah.
We personally know people who are going to now be targeted with the full federal government.
Yes.
I mean, they're talking about going through staff emails and all this, but realistically, this is a HUAC style witch hunt.
It absolutely is. I mean, this is the kind of thing authoritarians do, whether it's, Joseph McCarthy or Joseph Stalin.
Oh, yeah.
This is the same fucking thing. They go through, they find people who have said bad things about the powers that be and make them disappear.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I mean, they're branding this again in the most authoritarian and spooky way possible, right? Like calling it, saying that this is going to, quote, rebuild trust with the American public, end quote, is the kind of shit you say if you're about to do mock trials. And that's what this has the feeling of. And the way, I mean, alone, this is incredibly troubling. Like at a level that really, as someone who's done this as long as I have, and with the background in sociology, looking at this is as scary as it gets. This is part of a larger thing they're doing that we're getting a pretty good front row seat to, in the form of these comprehensive databases and lists.
Yes.
And Beattie's enemy list is one of many right now. We have Kash Patels, we have Beatty's, we have a number of these assholes have enemies lists.
Right.
This looks to be the first real move towards weaponizing that list into something that is going to work towards a propaganda goal, but also the broader goal of chilling dissent and really, literally ending the ability for people to trust that if you talk to a source within the government, that it will be private.
Right. And that's what they're really shooting for here is, again, to warn the others, to convince people that if you talk to journalists, if you talk about certain people within the government, we're going to come down on you real hard. And that's the whole point of this.
Yeah. And one of the things that those of us who study authoritarianism have found in the studies back, and there's a whole bunch of research on this, like the threat of implied violence and the threat is more powerful than the actual act in a lot of cases when the state is concerned. And so for Trump to kind of come in this way and the Republicans to come in this way to do it like this, it is truly a thought through and calculated attack on journalism, but more broadly, the entirety of the First Amendment. And so, you have that, which is a massive and sprawling effort, it appears, to weaponize the government's data. And you have that right next to now what we're starting to really get good, reporting on with what Doge is actually doing.
Right.
Under the guise of efficiency, which is building databases that correlate data from the IRS, from HHS, from a whole bunch of
Social Security Administration, anything they've been able to get their paws into.
Yes.
They're correlating this data together with immigration data.
Yep.
And this isn't going anywhere good
at all. No, and the reporting's starting to come out that they're starting to correlate it with social media profiles, with a whole number of other data points. And, data sets of this nature have been avoided in the federal government forever for a number of reasons, one of which, though, is the tendency towards abuse.
Right.
And in this case, Doge is partnering with Palantir, right? So you've got Peter Thiel and Elon Musk literally taking the most sensitive data in the government about all of us and building comprehensive AI enhanced databases that are being used to create, something akin to a social credit system. And they're doing it in such a way that, they're building the technological backbone of a police state.
Right.
So you couple that with what's going on with Beatty in the federal government, and really, we're starting to get a triangulation on how the information space is going to look here very shortly.
Right.
And it's this is incredibly tough, because none of us in this country, if we've been here our entire lives, or even if you've traveled a bit to other countries that might be a little bit more repressive, nothing's prepared any of us for this. And this is, this is an attempt at a perfect surveillance state and a perfect information state. And those don't work generally, but this has all the pieces for a totalitarian system. And they're not hiding it, right?
No.
You couple those two things together, where you have Beatty's enemy list, you have comprehensive lists that link together social media and governmental data, and you have a highly vindictive autocratic government. Yeah, this leads one place and it leads this way.
Right.
Quickly. And the real issue on top of all of this is what they've said is their selection criteria for certain things is going to be done by AI that they've trained.
Yes.
AI literally can't reason its way out of a fucking paper bag or out of certain
not at all.
arguments. And so if we really, for a lot of people, like, your life will be upended and in some cases ended by an AI algorithm that's been designed by the same fascists that took over government illegally.
Right. Right. And you're looking at stuff like Clearview AI, stuff that they've got tools to identify any face that they see on a social media platform, any face that they see on a surveillance tape from pretty much anywhere. And when you know that platforms like Clearview AI were started by guys like Chuck Johnson,
literal
fucking
Nazis,
white nationalists.
Yeah, and Nazis, literally.
Yeah. Chuck is a Holocaust denier. Chuck has done this.
Yeah.
And this is the guy who started this particular business. This is a guy who's big in genetics. Ask him why. What would you want a genetics company for, Chuckles? I mean, it's a little frightening.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's just it. Like, there's a huge part of the new right that no one, including experts in the subject, have talked about publicly because they are too scared.
Yeah.
And, the reality is this is a group that literally is trying to build the future for them and them alone.
Right.
And, you know, you've got guys like, you know, Hal Lambert, who was reported on in early reporting on Clearview, who's like just out in the open saying like,
Mhm.
we're doing this to quote take down the lefties and
Yeah.
and the quote communist academic left. And you know, this is a guy who helped design Clearview.
Yeah.
These are the people now who are designing the future for all of us because they can.
Hmm.
And you know, the threat is so much larger and truly scarier than I think a lot of people wanted to talk about because of the tech side's implicit scale, that we really have done ourselves a disservice. And now, you know, now we have to really, both as a public and as people like us in situations where, you know, we're educating the public and having conversations like this, we have to be much more clear about this. Because like
Yes.
when I say, you know, that the Trump administration is an accelerationist group, and that they have different aspects of their ideology that are different expressions of accelerationist belief. That's just the reality, you know. Like,
Yeah.
Make America Healthy Again is a core part of a whole bunch of different accelerationist belief structures. And you know, the new right and the neo-reactionary side of the new right, truly most of their ideology is based around ideas of rebuilding society from the ashes of democracy.
Right. Which
And
is exactly what the accelerationists want.
right. And so like I think a lot of people really are going to have to get comfortable, and we're going to have to take people on a little walk here coming up over
Hmm.
a few weeks and months into what that actually means in practice, because I think a lot of people right now don't see the bigger picture. And so, you know, in the first 100 days, it's not always easy to. We've started to see the bigger picture, and that's why I think it's good we continue to hammer on protest and getting out into direct action spaces, and to do things like, you know, showing solidarity by wearing a mask.
Yeah.
But we're going to have a significant pushback that's based on actually understanding the threat, not based on a threat that existed a decade ago when Trump first showed up, because this is a wholly new thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's going to be difficult. We understand. I think that this is really difficult stuff for a lot of people to comprehend.
Yeah.
You know, and I freely admit that there are times that, even as cynical as I am about some of this, I look at it and I'm kind of like, I cannot believe we're here. I can't believe we ended up in this.
All the time. I get it.
I mean, one of my favorite bands, and a lot of people's favorite bands that grew up listening to punk rock, is a band from Canada called Propagandhi. And they yesterday canceled their entire American summer tour. And
Yep.
if you've heard their lyrics, there's probably a pretty good reason these guys figured they were going to end up gulagged as a result of this. And it's just this absolute chilling effect of people feeling like they can't express this kind of stuff. And when the people who've been, you know, politically mouthy since 1993 on these issues are now starting to say, maybe we don't really want to go there at this point, it's pretty clear that we are in a real bad place. And it's going to take a certain amount of adjustment for people to get their head around that.
Yeah.
The idea that we're here.
Yeah.
But this is why we keep hammering the idea that you got to get out there and you got to protest. You have to get out there because there is not very many other alternatives left.
No. And that's just it, right? Like the thing that we're starting to experience is something that I've written about and I'm writing a piece on right now, which is the silence that comes before the actual fascist state comes into full being. And
right.
That silence is the thing that's the final push towards the fascist state. And we're starting to see the silence take over in certain places. And we're starting to see it get pushed back on in others. And so, the thing that we all have to do is remember that our silence is going to be used against us, because even if we don't think this comes for us, in the end it does.
It's going to come for everybody.
Yeah, and it already is in many ways that we just haven't felt yet. So
Yeah.
I think, for me, the biggest thing is people need to educate themselves. They understand the full scope, but also get to a point where you're more comfortable in an environment that's going to not have black and white answers. It's not going to have binaries. There are going to be moments where
Yep.
there are victories that are going to feel like losses, and there are going to be losses that truly are victories, even when it feels like a loss and might be seen as one. And
Right.
we, as a country, have a real tough time ahead of us.
We do.
And we are going to start to find out how tough in the coming days, weeks, and months. And it's not because Trump's new language or because we find out about a new dissidents list. It's because of actions they've already taken. And those are going to compound, but we can do what we can to mitigate those by working together as communities, finding new communities, building, resilience in those communities by getting out and doing the mutual aid that's needed, by getting
Yep.
just literally going out and knocking on someone's door from a group that you're a part of and saying, how's it going? There's so much we can all be doing right now, and some of it's huge stuff, some of it's systemic change stuff, and some of it's literally how do we make sure that our friends and our neighbors get fed.
And that's where we're at right now.
Yeah.
We are at that point where we're all starting to rediscover certain things
Yeah.
that we didn't realize were
These
still
are-
important up until
Yeah.
now.
And these are all great American traditions, right?
Mhm.
These are things that like truly do make America great in a lot of ways, and
Yeah.
aren't, the horrifying white supremacist or capitalist ideas that we've been inundated with as, quote, making America great. The reality
Yeah.
is, what makes America great is the communities that have made it up forever. And the way that we've worked together in different groups and have really, in moments where shit really has hit the fan, said, look, I can't do anything about the president being an unmitigated dickbag. But what I can do is make sure that my 3 closest neighbors have food.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that we've touched on. I know I've talked about and written about. That's the thing. And that's how you get through catastrophe. It's how you get
Yep.
through disaster. It's also how you get through an authoritarian takeover of your country.
Yeah.
It's the thing that makes you unbreakable.
And that's powerful. Like you said, it's like giving you the little foundation. Once you've started doing this kind of stuff, it gives you the foundation to get out and do bigger stuff and
Yeah.
to do more and bigger stuff that might make more of a difference. But it all starts with like that one act of doing something that's out of your comfort zone that you wouldn't necessarily have done a year ago, even 6 months ago. But now you've realized that, hey, I got to do something.
Yeah. Well, and for a lot of people, they're not going to live in a place where there's some huge community already.
No.
So, really starting to identify and find the communities where you do have the things you want and what you need to do to build what you want. That's the whole game. And
Mhm.
if you figure that stuff out, you can start to navigate the other parts of it really much more, in a straightforward way, because it's not new anymore. It's just
Right.
what you're doing. And there are great resources. Like I said, Let This Radicalize You is great. Anything by Shane Burley is great. There are a number of names, and we can put them in
We will.
this week's list. But there's a whole bunch you can be doing that doesn't look like a political act, especially if you're someone who's not comfortable with more extreme, let's say, direct action stuff.
Sure.
There's so much in between the mass protest that is really just an onboarding event and something that's much more direct action oriented. And you can find a place. There's a place for every one of us, and they don't all have to be in the streets. Sometimes it's just making phone calls and making phone trees of you and 20 people so you can
Right.
get stuff moved around. Some of it's building the logistics in that way. Some of it's building the resilience to say, look, we have 10 people who are going to go out and protest and 5 more who can't tonight because they're sick or working. And just figuring out how many tasks you can take on, which ones you can, and really, work within the constraints of being you. You can't do more than you can do.
Right. And the nice thing about it all now is that there's a lot of other people who are in the same spot as you.
Yeah.
There's a
There-
lot of people who are new to this kind of stuff. There's
Yep.
a lot of people who are new to actually going out and doing it. And you can take comfort in that you're not the only noob on the block.
Oh hell no. And that's going to increasingly be true. The majority of people who are going to come into this have never done this before in any way.
Right.
Most people up until recently, for better or worse, haven't had to think about it. Now, this is one step in a bunch that people are
Yep.
going to be forced to make.
But we got to make it.
And yeah,
That's where we're at.
and most people are already. They don't know it. It's just in small acts that they're taking every day. And,
Right.
You know, and that's what most of this actually looks like. It doesn't look like grand acts of like, you know, flags out and flares burning and 1,000 people in the street. It's very much more, I'm carrying groceries to these people who I know need it, or I'm taking these people's laundry to the laundromat to do laundry. Or,
Right.
you know, whatever it is, there's so much more to it than just the thing that we think of when we see protest.
The journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step and all that.
Yep,
And
exactly.
it's true. You
Yeah.
just got to start.
Yeah.
Start working on it. Start doing it. And
Exactly.
then the rest sort of takes care of itself at that point.
Becomes muscle memory.
Mm-hmm.